Alright guys, another day, another video. So this is the third video in the series on SyntaxMakers, my side project for building a job hunting website. And in this series, I'm going to be completely transparent on the entire process, including financials, what I make, what it costs to run cloud, or any other expenses related to the business, as well as, of course, the technology stack, what I'm using, how I'm building it, all of that stuff. Now I'm going to make a slight tweak to the way these videos are going forward. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these SyntaxMakers specific videos to be more about logging status with you guys and giving you an overview of design, any specific issues, errors, failures, both financial and technical. And that's going to be the majority of the video. And in technology specific areas, I'm going to make dedicated videos. So for example, I've already made videos on how I implemented JWT and authentication throughout the app, and also how I did view transitions for page transitions within the app as well. So I'll keep those two things distinct, and let's continue with the video. All right, so let's do a little demo of what I have thus far. So I think you've already seen these two icons that let you into the screens for the specific type of user. So then if you click on the developer, then immediately you're going to get asked to log in. I have done the JWT stuff specific to the login, and some of this, for example, this transition in a separate video. So those are technical specific videos where we drill down into how I built those components. So I'm going to provide a link in the description for those. But again, this video is intended for describing where I'm at, the status, and some of the design choices and maybe issues that I've been having. So then if we look at the screen, we can see more realistic data. I've gone ahead and populated some more fake data that is more realistic to what a real job posting might look like. So we have that, and then over here we have some changes to the menu. So I am just trying to get some placeholders in there for these screens once they become available. So then if we drill down, you can see also the screen for the individual jobs that are here. So I pop back in. This section is actually mostly done right now, but I've not populated any data there. This is actually using Slate.js in the developer mode. It's going to be read-only for obvious reasons. And then in the employer mode, it's going to be editable with rich text formatting, bold, underlined, headers, all that good stuff. But I've not gone ahead yet and put in any fake data. If you want, I can create a specific video, technical video about how I created the text editor. It's actually quite involved. If you've never built one yourself, it could definitely take a couple of weeks depending on how complicated you're building it. For me, it took a couple of days because I'm trying to keep things simple for now. So anyway, this is the UI status update. Ooh, I found a bug there. All right, so I need to fix that. So then next, let's look at the actual code, starting with the server side. All right, so like I stated before, I'm going to keep this video series very transparent. If there's bugs, you're going to see them. I'm not going to try to hide them and pretend that I always write perfect code or anything like that. Any errors, any issues that I have, I'm going to be transparent. Even, on the financial side, whatever it is, I'm going to try and keep this very realistic. So let's get started with the server stuff. So then, as you know, this application is built with React and JavaScript on the front end, and Rust and ActixWeb on the back end. So if we look at the folder structure, you might notice some changes from the last video. So what I've done is we still have the repository folder. So this is going to be all the stuff specific to hitting the database, right? So then even though we have an authentication call, I've named it specifically so it's clear, right, that this call is specific to hitting the database. And we're talking about passing or receiving the email and password and making sure that this exists properly in the database. So that's why we have this as a separate thing. But then when we are not talking about interacting with the database specifically, and we're talking about authentication in regards to JWT and encryption and all that related stuff, I've separated that concern out. I'm pretty big with doing solid principles and separation of concerns and all that stuff. So we have the JWT encryption related stuff inside of here. And this is going to be all of the stuff specific to creating tokens, managing tokens, and authentication in regards to those tokens, and something called claims. Now, if you're new to this and you want to deep dive and learn how you can build this stuff for your own project, I have a dedicated JWT video, technical video, where I go dive deep into how I built this, as well as some security best practices, so you can look at that video. The other thing that I did is, now that I've gotten kind of deeper and more realistic in terms of making these calls and doing the authentication and stuff like that, I realized I needed some more helper capability for certain specific targeted things. So for example, in here, in almost any API service, you're always going to run into this, but basically when you are saving in your database, you're saving in a certain timestamp, time zone, date, time type. And then when you're retrieving, or perhaps when you're receiving data from the client and you need to convert that data into a type that the database is supposed to have, you need a lot of conversion capability. And that's true not only for timestamps, but for, any number of other types of data types. So here I have a helper. In my database, I've chosen to save as UTC. So I want a converter to go from UTC to local. So that's what that's about. And then in some API services, you're going to need file access. So I've built a little helper for that. And then I found that for my testing purposes, I want to be able to get a range of random data or random numbers. So I created this in order to do that. So moving on, we have, so in this API service, because I don't have much in terms of compute or heavy data processing or anything like that, it's really two main pieces. It's the repository layer, and then it's the routes layer, right? And again, I'm keeping those two pieces separate. So then if we go into the routes layer, as far as the new stuff in this video, right? So we don't want to be redundant. So we're going to look at the new stuff. So what I have is I have the login capability, and then I have the ability to refresh an access token, which is different from purely getting an access token. And again, I dive deep into why you want distinct access token generation and refresh token generation. It's a security specific issue. So you can take a look at that in that separate dedicated JWT video. So that's where I have that information. And yeah, I think that's basically it. I mean, I did add a new couple of routes in here. So for example, I needed I needed to be able to get jobs by employer. I haven't shown the employer screen because it's not there's not much to show in there. So, but I am still building it out day by day. So I have some additional functionality that you might want to take a look at. So that's basically where I'm at with the server side, and you might want to take a look at that. All right, so let's look at the UI specific stuff. So you can see here I have this web client folder. Let's close this out. And the way that I've structured my web client, yeah, this is pretty important to talk about. So if you look here, I have a domain folder and I have a presentation folder, right? So it's pretty obvious what's going on here. Anything UI specific, I have inside of presentation, and then business logic specific, I have inside of domain. So the way that I like to structure things is, although I am using Redux, and I understand that most places they put their network calls inside of Redux, and they put their network calls inside of components, I definitely disagree with that practice. So the way that I do it is I put in a separate repository layer, even though this is my UI, right? Normally you associate that with a server, but I create a separate repository layer, and I have my actual network specific API calls in here. So the reason why I do this is because even though these repository calls might be in 10 different components, or they might, they might be kind of all over the place inside of the application, although I never put network calls inside of my Redux, and I'll talk about why. But if I have a dedicated layer to do that, and I put all of the network API call specific, those specific calls in here, then if I have a bug in here, or if my URL changes or the parameters change or whatever the case may be, then I make that change in one place, and instantly that fix or that update propagates throughout the application. I don't need to go hunting and pecking across 20 different components to try and, fix these specific, whatever the call may be. I have it in one place, I update it in one place, it gets fixed across the application. Now, the other thing that, like I said, I don't do is I don't put any network calls anywhere in my Redux specific updating functionality, whether it be the hook or whatever your environment does. I'm definitely against that. I think it makes everything more complicated. Then you have to start whipping out thunks. You have to start thinking about maybe using selectors and Saga and all of this, madness. It just becomes unnecessarily complicated, which is why a lot of places are no longer using Sagas and really dumbing down their Redux infrastructure. You're really asking for problems by putting in asynchronous calls inside of your Redux functionality. So you won't see that in my application. And then in the actual components themselves, where is it? Yeah, you will see network calls, but like I said, you're going to see the calls that I put into the repo layer, so that if I discover a bug, or if the server team decides to change the parameters or change the returned type from the API service, I don't need to go into login TSX, register TSX, and 30 other components in order to fix it. I go into one place in order to fix it. Now, in addition to that, what you're going to see is, let's go in here. What you're going to see is you're going to see that I have a dedicated data model type, right? So this guy right here, that is mapped pretty much one-to-one. I might make minor tweaks, but for the most part, it's mapped one-to-one, where I take the data from the API service and I grab it as is, dealing with how the data is structured from the API service, right? But then I have a separate view model that is specific to the UI. So again, one is trying to handle business logic, API services, data, stuff like that. So it's very primed to be coherent with those types coming in from the API service. But then on the UI side, as you can see here, it's in the presentation folder. So on the UI side, I have a view model that is specific to providing data in a way that the UI would like to use it or would like to present it, right? So on top of the type itself, I have this conversion functionality, which will take that, again, business logic data model type, along with any other data. In this case, we're talking about a user, a developer. So we need the access token, assuming they logged in. And we're going ahead and we're converting the data model data into a view model data, again, to make it more easily digestible and presentable by the UI. So I might have, I don't know if I have anything here. Okay, here. So I might have stuff where I want to convert from the timestamp that came from the API service, right, into a more human readable, more friendly datetime format that the user might be more comfortable with. So instead of seeing like 03/11 2011 04:03:23, whatever, they might see, oh, 2 hours ago, oh, 3 minutes ago, oh, 2 weeks ago. That kind of a thing is more presentable on the UI. So for the converter, I am taking advantage of one place to convert from the data model into the UI model. So here I'm converting to the friendly date timestamp, and here I'm converting from the data as it comes in from the API service call, which is some kind of, I forgot what the exact name is, data array type, ArrayBuffer. That's what it is, ArrayBuffer right there. So it's coming in as an ArrayBuffer from the network, but then I want to be able to convert it into, what did I use? A blob type, right? So it's easier to make use of on the browser because that's kind of the native type on the browser, right? So these conversions I do in one place, and it just makes everything so much easier when having to bounce around between the API side of things and the UI side of things. Okay, so then we have, right, so I told you about this thing, or I showed you this thing. So why I have this is because I have two types of users. So if we go back into the server, we can see here that I have this employer type representing the person posting jobs, and then I have this developer type, right? Now, obviously, I could have taken these two, merged them into a single user type, and maybe had a type field in there, are you a developer, are you an employer, and then had some secondary tables that had the additional data specific to the type of user. So in this case, primary lang ID is for a developer, but for an employer, I have a company ID, right? So those ancillary pieces of data, I could have created secondary tables for that and had a single centralized user table for that. I don't like those kind of systems. They make everything way more complicated. I like to keep things simple. You're going to actually see in real production databases those kinds of structures where they try to normalize tables and structures and kind of reduce things and distill things down. To me, those are bad designs, and I try to avoid those kind of things where you're sort of forced to have this schizophrenic thing where you're sharing disparate data sets between a single table. So for me, it's bad design, and I avoid those things. So that's why I have this are you a developer, are you an employer sort of setup here. And it's global. That's why it's in the Redux folder. And the Redux folder is in the presentation folder because Redux is specific to the UI. And of course, because it's here, it's global to the entire application. So then login open is for controlling the opening and closing of the login modal, because I realize that there's going to be lots of screens that require authentication, and I don't know if maybe, for example, the user logs in, saves that URL into their bookmarks, comes back 2 months later after their tokens have expired, necessitating the login screen to pop open again. So for those kind of scenarios, having the control of that state, is it open or not, true or false, is more appropriate to be global to the entire application. In the case of the profile, who the user is, their metadata, username, full name, email, whatever it is, also for obvious reasons should be global. And that's why these three things are inside of Redux. Now, I know that there are a ton of applications out there that like to put everything inside of Redux. I hate that design. I find it to be quite strange. I don't know why people do that, but whatever makes sense, I put globally inside of Redux. If it's local to a specific component, I use local state. And then some of the stuff I do share with props across different components, but I never use context directly myself. Some of the libraries that I use may have context in them, but I find that context triggers unwanted re-renders left and right. Like, I totally understand that Facebook uses context a lot, and that's great if they use it, but I find that it triggers unnecessary re-renders. I absolutely avoid it like the plague. Okay, so this is the transitions system inside of CSS. I just created a helper function for React so that it's more easy to use inside of React. I have a dedicated video for using this. It's super easy, but it gives you just so much nicer of a experience to get that nice transition. Again, I'm not sure if you can see it in the video, but it's like an almost no cost way of getting what was once very hard to do with CSS. But take a look at that if you want to put transitions into your web app. So then, again, I have dedicated login and registration. I have dedicated controls. the developer list, employer list. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is because when you're building apps, at every opportunity that you can to reuse components, especially when you're using React, because that's the whole point of having these functional components, to be able to reuse them, to be able to componentize. So in other words, do composition, create a component, use that component inside of another component. So if you look at these two applications, sure, they have their own fields, and I could probably tighten this up and make this shared too, but for now I need to get this out. So if you look at this, you can see I have job preview list, I have job preview list. So I'm reusing a lot of my components, and that's why I have this jobs folder where I have job full view, right? So that would be this screen right here, right? And I'm going to be using this job full view across both employers and developers. So in the employer, when it's the employer that is seeing that screen, then they will have the ability to edit any of these entries, including this down here. But for obvious reasons, the developer will just see a read-only view of that screen. So the other stuff that you were seeing, so these individual items right here, is job preview, and then the entire list is job preview list. You can see right here, I'm reusing that component, and you saw me use job preview list over here inside of each of the list screens that we have here. And I've also created a lister that kind of automates some of this work of having individual sub elements and listing them out. So then in the navigation, we have this left menu. So what I created, again, for reuse purposes, is I created a core called left menu, because we're having developers and employers, and they have their slightly different requirements. So I have a left menu, generic left menu. It takes children, and then I have a dev specific file which will take that component and then put in its own unique content inside of it. And the same thing for employer. It'll take that left menu and it'll put in its own unique content inside of it. This go back button, super trivial code, but really valuable in terms of reducing your work. So here, I gotta animate that. But here we have our use navigate. I'm gonna navigate. Going back is really nice. You just do -1 and it will just go back to the immediate prior. So that's pretty sweet for React Router. And then, like I said, I have the text editor. It's not 100% complete yet. It's probably like 80-90% complete. But if you want, I can do a separate video for this because it is pretty involved. So I'm not gonna talk about that in this video. For layouts and the layout system, I realized that almost all the screens are going to be having the same kind of layout with the columns. So I put that layout into its own component, and then the screens make use of that component as a parent, but they stick in their own content. So that's what layout is. And then lister, you already saw. I am having a little bit of code to contain the preview items that were there. This is a parent to do modal capability. So if I go back in here, this modal right here, the way that it shows up, the way that it kind of grays out the background and shows up on top of every other thing, that's the modal component right here. This one we won't talk about for this video. And again, we have the stuff that is specific to UI. with each one having its own converter function for convenience. And this one is the key item. So what I realized is a lot of these data view models are going to need a parent component to be presented on the screen. And whenever you have more than one, like on the preview list in React, you need to give them a unique identifier so that you don't trigger unnecessary re-renders. So that's what this is about. It's very convenient to have that in your UI view model, so I put it there. So then in terms of the pages, there's a lot more pages now. So let's just go to app.tsx where our routes are. And you can see a lot more routes have come in since the last video. Now, a lot of people these days are saying that, oh, enums are evil and you shouldn't use enums and whatever. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. Would you rather have these strings show up 50 different times in your application, or would you rather have type-safe enums that you can change in one place if you have to, whether it be the name by using rename symbol and VS Code's helpers, or the actual value itself? I mean, these videos that I'm seeing about enums being evil are so like preposterous that I don't even know what they're talking about. But anyway, so this is the stuff related to our routes. So you can see here, I am on the latest version of React Router. One of the really horrible things about React Router, although overall it's quite good, is they have so many version changes and they have so many tweaks in the way that the thing works. It's like, that's really a disaster, I think. But I am on the latest one, and the latest one works in this fashion on the browser. You create your router by defining the components and the paths, and then you send it to your router provider. I'm just warning you, I'm giving you this warning because once you start using React Router, you're going to start inevitably Google searching and looking for, fixes to certain issues and whatever. And what you will end up inevitably getting is answers to the versions prior. And then you're going to try to implement those, and it's not going to work for the latest version because they decided to deprecate, a whole bunch of stuff, right? So just be aware of that when you're researching React Router, or otherwise it's just going to be such a pain in the ass. All right, so the pages. So then we have these different pages, and the way that I set it up is, again, I created a root component that already has the capabilities that I know that every screen is going to use, right? So that would be layout, maybe certain styling stuff, and then of course a left-hand menu, which we already saw. So then it takes children as a content and allows you to be flexible and put in whatever content you want. So if we have whatever screen, if we go into any of these screens, you're going to see that developer home and then our own custom content. So here we have nothing, but here we have the job full view screen. And then over here we have the dev job preview list, which I already showed you, etc., etc. So I'm very big on reusing code. And like I said, especially for React development, where that's kind of the point, the whole point of everything, to do composition. So if you're new to React, you should definitely take a look at that. This is our main jump off screen. Are you an employer? Are you a developer? Yeah, so that's it. And then there's going to be a ton of other stuff, but obviously that's all related to the new screens and the new components. So take a look at that. I don't have any financial information for obvious reasons. The app is not deployed yet, but I can tell you what's coming next. We are going to be working on or fleshing out more the employer screens. So I'll be able to show you that in the next video. And then I might be able to fit in or squeeze in the emailer system that I'm going to be using. Although I'm going to kind of hedge a bit on the emailing system because I'm trying to save money. Obviously, this is a side project. I'm not going to be shelling out $1,000 a month on cloud and email services. So what I'm thinking is that I will, for developers, I actually won't even request their email because there's nothing really that developers can do, right? There's not that much in terms of security or knowing them or whatever. And I don't want to be holding on to people's private information anyway. So what I might end up doing, at least for developers, is just communicating with them entirely on the web app. So that means that if they don't turn on notifications on the app, they're not going to be notified when they receive a response from the employer. But on the flip side, for me, it saves me money because I don't have to have emailing for the developer side of the house. And again, I'm not interested in selling people's information and email lists and stuff like that. So nevertheless, even if they don't get notifications, they can just come into the site, see their job alerts, see their communications from prospective employers and stuff like that. Having said that, in the case of employers, I might be forced to do that because, they are going to have to spend money and I am going to have to somewhat know who they are and stuff like that for finance reasons. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do on that end, but I'm pretty close to deciding that I'm not going to take emails on the developer side. So, okay, that is the latest status on the side project SyntaxMakers. So in the next video, you'll be seeing more info about that. Let me know if you want to see a dedicated Slate.js text editing video. All of the specific content, again, for JWT, Vue transitions, I've created dedicated videos. If you want to learn more about Rust development, about React development, even testing, I have dedicated Udemy videos for that. I will also provide links. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Like the video if you like the video and subscribe.